In the last lecture, we started improving our caching setup by assigning version numbers and hence making sure that we don't interfere with existing caches while still changing our service worker file to cater for updates. Now I need to clean up the old cache too though, because otherwise not only do we crowd our cache storage because we add more and more caches, equally bad, we also fetch outdated versions as you see in our application. So let's fix that by adding some cleanup code. Where do you clean up the old cache then? The first inclination might be to do that in the install step too, right after cache add all. But keep in mind, why do we use a different version number? Because we didn't want to mess with the old cache because it's still getting used. For the same reason, we certainly shouldn't clean up the old cache here, because that might break our application. A better place to do cleanup work is in the activate event, because this will only be executed once the user closed all pages, all tabs, and opened the application a new one. So now it's safe to update the cache because now we're not in a running application anymore. So here I want to do my cleanup work, and I will use event wait until here to again wait until we're done with the cleanup before we continue. Because again, we're doing some work on the cache, and if we don't wait for this to finish, we might react to a fetch event and serve that from the old cache which we're about to tear down, so probably not what we want. In there, I'll now use the caches object again, referring to the general cache storage, and then here I want to use keys. Now you learned about this, and keys gives you back the keys of all the sub-caches in your cache storage. So as in our case, if we have 3 caches here, static, dynamic, and static v2, we would get back an array with static, dynamic, and static v2. So just a couple of strings, the names of our caches. This is what this gives us back. It gives us back this information as a promise, so I will chain then. And in that function, we now have the finished key list, which again, because it's important, is just an array of strings with the names of our caches. 3 in our case right now, but could be more of course. I then want to return promise all here. We haven't learned about this method yet. Promise all takes an array of promises and waits for all of them to finish, so that we only return from this function once we're really done with the cleanup. Now we don't have an array of promises yet though. We have an array of keys, of cache names. Well, we can convert this into promises. So let's take the key list and yet let's use map. Map is a default JavaScript array operator which allows us to transform an array. So we want to transform this array of strings into an array of promises. Map takes a function which will be executed on each array element. So each element in the key list array, which again is just a string. I'll name it key here. You can give this argument any name you want. It will be populated automatically because this function is executed automatically. In there, I now want to check if the key, if that is not equal to my updated cache name, static v2. If it's not equal to that, I want to delete it. The same is true for my dynamic cache because I want to keep that too. It's still named dynamic. So I'll also check if it's not equal, so if key is not equal to dynamic. If it's neither equal to our static cache, the current one, nor to the current dynamic one, I want to get rid of it because then it's the older one. So here I will first of all console log service worker and then removing old cache. And I'll pass the key so that we can see which cache was removed. This won't remove it though, of course, it's just the info log. Instead here I will return caches delete the key. Now delete is another method we can use on the cache storage, and as it sounds, it deletes a cache with a given name. So this is a string. This is the key we identified as outdated. And caches delete returns a promise which makes sure that, since we use map here, we replace the string we had in key list with the fitting promise. And by the way, if this is not met, so if we have static v2 or dynamic, it returns null. So it will simply replace the given string in key list with nothing. So in the end, we will have an array of promises from the caches delete method, And we will wait for all these operations to finish before we then return and therefore know that we're done with the cleanup work. So with that, let's save this. Let's go back to our application then, and let's reload this. We did some work in the service worker, so now we need to activate this. Before I do that, let's click on console. We see installation is finished. And now we'll cleanly do this by closing the old tab and opening a new one. In that new tab, let me open the console, and you see installing, pre-caching, activating, and there we have removing old cache static, which makes sense because we have a static v2 version. And in application under cache storage, you indeed don't see the old cache anymore, and therefore we use the new cache with the new feed.js file with the black colored text again, because that is what I changed it to. Now if I change this to white, all I have to do is go back to the service worker and bump that version up here and down here, and we will optimize this soon so that we don't have to change it in multiple places. But with these changes in place, now if I save this, close the tab and reopen it, you will see that as soon as I, do this one more time, because of course now it just got installed, so now it got activated, now we have the white text here. So this is now how we can manage the versions and clean up old caches. Of course it's a bit cumbersome to edit this name all over the file. So let's optimize this in the next lecture.